I live in a 3-bedroom house that I designed, in a quiet suburban neighborhood that I worked tirelessly to afford. As a software engineer, my life is built on logic, precision, and order, principles that governed the code I wrote and the life I led. The house was my sanctuary, a testament to years of late nights, endless debugging, and a singular focus on building a stable future. It was meant to be my quiet corner of the world, a place of peace. That peace, however, was shattered by the very people I thought I could trust the most, my own family. This is the story of how my generosity was twisted into a weapon against me, and how I had to use cold, hard logic to reclaim my home and my life from my entitled sister and her husband who saw me not as family, but as a burden to be exploited. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. I live in a 3-bedroom house that I designed, in a quiet suburban neighborhood that I worked tirelessly to afford. As a software engineer, my life is built on logic, precision, and order, principles that governed the code I wrote and the life I led. The house was my sanctuary, a testament to years of late nights, endless debugging, and a singular focus on building a stable future. It was meant to be my quiet corner of the world, a place of peace. That peace, however, was shattered by the very people I thought I could trust the most, my own family. This is the story of how my generosity was twisted into a weapon against me, and how I had to use cold, hard logic to reclaim my home and my life from my entitled sister and her husband who saw me not as family, but as a burden to be exploited. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. I live in a 3-bedroom house that I designed, in a quiet suburban neighborhood that I worked tirelessly to afford. As a software engineer, my life is built on logic, precision, and order, principles that governed the code I wrote and the life I led. The house was my sanctuary, a testament to years of late nights, endless debugging, and a singular focus on building a stable future. It was meant to be my quiet corner of the world, a place of peace. That peace, however, was shattered by the very people I thought I could trust the most, my own family. This is the story of how my generosity was twisted into a weapon against me, and how I had to use cold, hard logic to reclaim my home and my life from my entitled sister and her husband who saw me not as family, but as a burden to be exploited. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. It all started on a rainy Tuesday in October. I remember the weather distinctly because the rhythmic drumming of rain against my office window was the only sound that broke the silence of my concentration. I was deep in the middle of a complex coding project, a multi-layered system architecture that required my full attention. My phone buzzed once, then again, and a third time. It was my sister, Emily. I almost ignored it, but a fourth call signaled an urgency that I couldn't dismiss. I sighed, saved my work, and answered. "Clara?" "Thank God you picked up." Emily's voice was frantic, laced with a familiar note of theatrical panic that always set my teeth on edge. "We're in a crisis. A real one this time." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, pinching the bridge of my nose. With Emily, it was always a crisis. A forgotten bill, a fender bender, a disagreement with a neighbor, each was treated with the gravity of a natural disaster. "What's wrong, Em?" "It's the landlord," she said, her voice cracking. "He's selling the apartment building. We have 60 days to move out." 60 days, Clara. Where are we supposed to go? Behind her, I could hear the faint, melancholic strumming of a guitar, no doubt my brother-in-law, Tom, providing the dramatic soundtrack to their latest misfortune. Tom was a musician, or at least, that's what he called himself. In the 10 years they'd been married, his musical career had consisted of a few open mic nights and a YouTube channel with 112 subscribers. Emily was a part-time yoga instructor, her income as flexible and unreliable as her poses. Together, they were a financial house of cards, perpetually on the verge of collapse. Okay, I said, trying to inject a sense of calm into the conversation. 60 days is a decent amount of time. You can start looking for a new place. I can help you with the security deposit if you need it. Help, she scoffed, and the sound was so full of bitter indignation that it took me aback. Clara, you don't understand. Our credit is shot. We have no savings. Tom's last gig paid him in drink vouchers. We can't get approved for a new lease anywhere decent. We're going to be homeless. The word hung in the air between us, homeless. It was a word designed to trigger guilt, to pull at the family heartstrings she knew I possessed. We hadn't had the easiest childhood. Our parents were loving but financially careless, and the specter of instability had haunted our early years. It was the primary reason I had worked so obsessively to build the life I had. I wanted security, a foundation that could never be shaken. Emily, it seemed, had inherited our parents' romantic disregard for practicality. Don't be dramatic, I said, though my resolve was already softening. You won't be homeless. Where will we go, then? She pressed, her voice rising. Tell me, Clara, with your big house and your fancy job. What are people like us supposed to do? The jab was subtle, but it landed. My success had always been a source of unspoken tension between us. I saw it as the result of hard work and sacrifice. She saw it as a stroke of luck that had unfairly passed her by. And then she said the words I knew were coming, the real purpose of her call. Can we just stay with you? Just for a little while? Just until we get back on our feet. A few months, tops. Your house is so big, Clara. You have all those empty rooms. You wouldn't even know we were there. I closed my eyes, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. Every logical fiber in my being screamed no. My house was my space, meticulously organized, a reflection of my ordered mind. The thought of Emily's chaotic energy and Tom's perpetual lounging invading my sanctuary was deeply unsettling. They weren't neat, they weren't quiet, and they certainly weren't respectful of boundaries. But she was my sister. Despite her flaws, despite the years of her leaning on me, the bond of family was a powerful one. I thought of us as kids, sharing a small room, whispering secrets in the dark. How could I turn my back on her now? A few months, I said, my voice flat. 3 months, Emily. That gives you plenty of time to save up and find a new place. And you have to promise to be actively looking. Oh, of course. Yes. Absolutely. The relief in her voice was palpable, a tidal wave of effusive gratitude. Thank you, Clara. You're a lifesaver. You have no idea what this means to us. We'll be perfect guests, I swear. We'll cook, we'll clean, we'll help out with whatever you need. And Tom has to get a job, I added, a sudden burst of firmness surprising even myself. A real job. Not just gigs. Something with a steady paycheck. There was a brief pause. Of course, she said, her tone slightly less enthusiastic. He's been looking. This will just give him the stability he needs to really focus on his search. Thank you, little sister. You've saved us. I hung up the phone with a sense of profound dread. I had just willingly invited chaos into my orderly life. I told myself it was the right thing to do. It was what families did for each other. It was only for 3 months. I repeated that phrase to myself like a mantra, only 3 months. 2 weeks later, they moved in. The chaos arrived in a beat-up moving van, spilling out onto my pristine driveway in a mess of mismatched furniture, boxes overflowing with clothes, and at least a dozen musical instruments. My minimalist living room, once a study in clean lines and neutral tones, was instantly cluttered with their bohemian paraphernalia. Dreamcatchers, incense burners, and vibrant, clashing tapestries seemed to sprout from the walls. The first week was a testament to their promises. Emily cooked a few elaborate, messy vegetarian meals. Tom, when he wasn't in a creative session in the spare bedroom he'd converted into a makeshift studio, would awkwardly vacuum the living room. They were overly polite, constantly thanking me, treating me like a benevolent queen in my own castle. But it was a performance, and I could already see the cracks appearing in the facade. By the end of the second week, the cooking had stopped, replaced by a growing pile of takeout containers in the recycling bin. Tom's job search consisted of him scrolling through music blogs on the couch while strumming his guitar. My spare bedroom now had sound-dampening foam, purchased with a credit card I was sure was already maxed out, taped haphazardly to the walls. The faint, repetitive sound of his compositions became the new, unwanted soundtrack to my evenings. My life was no longer my own. My quiet mornings were interrupted by Emily's loud yoga sessions in the living room, complete with chanting and New Age music. My evenings, which I used to spend reading or working on personal coding projects, were now spent trying to ignore their loud television shows or the smell of Tom's clove cigarettes wafting in from the backyard. I tried to set boundaries. I created a chore chart, a simple, logical system for sharing the household duties. It was posted on the refrigerator, and for the first 2 days, it was met with cheerful compliance. On the third day, Emily's tasks were left undone. When I gently reminded her, she sighed dramatically. "Clara, I'm just so drained. The stress of our situation, you know? It's just a lot." Tom was even worse. "I'd love to help with the lawn, Clara," he'd say, not looking up from his laptop, "but I'm on the verge of a creative breakthrough. I can't lose this momentum." The momentum never seemed to result in anything tangible. Their corner of the house grew progressively messier. Dishes were left in the sink, clothes were draped over furniture, and a general sense of disarray began to creep into my once orderly home. I felt like a landlord, a maid, and a parent, all at once. I was funding their lives, the roof over their heads, the food they ate, the electricity that powered Tom's endless jam sessions. And yet, I was the one who felt like an intruder in my own home. My friend Ben, a financial advisor with a refreshingly cynical view of the world, had warned me. We'd been friends since college, and he knew my family dynamics all too well. When I told him my sister and her husband were moving in, he'd simply raised an eyebrow. "For how long?" he'd asked. 3 months, I said confidently. He'd just shaken his head. "Get it in writing, Clara. A simple lease agreement. Even for $1 a month. Protect yourself." I had laughed it off. "Their family, Ben. It's not a business transaction." "Family is exactly why you need it in writing," he'd replied, his tone serious. "It's the people closest to you who can do the most damage." His words echoed in my mind as the first month drew to a close. The 3-month deadline felt both impossibly distant and terrifyingly close. I had made a generous offer, born of love and a sense of familial duty. But as I lay in bed at night, listening to the muffled sounds of their lives seeping through my walls, I had the sinking feeling that my generosity was being mistaken for a blank check. And I was beginning to understand that some checks, once written, are very difficult to cancel. The 3-month mark came and went with no mention of their departure. By month 4, my home had completed its transformation from a sanctuary to a shared space where I was increasingly a guest. The initial performance of gratitude had long since faded, replaced by a comfortable, almost arrogant, sense of entitlement. They had absorbed my home into their lifestyle, treating it not as a temporary refuge but as their permanent residence. My rules were suggestions, my space was communal, and my generosity was an expectation. It was the small things, at first, that began to grate on me like sand in a machine. The way Tom would use my expensive Wusthof knives to pry open a can of beans because he couldn't be bothered to find the can opener. The way Emily would borrow my clothes without asking, leaving them crumpled in her room, smelling of patchouli oil. The thermostat, which I kept at a precise 68 degrees, was now in a constant state of flux, cranked up to a sweltering 75 whenever I was at work. My electricity bills skyrocketed, a silent testament to the lights they left on, the long, indulgent showers they took, and the constant hum of Tom's recording equipment. When I tried to bring up these issues, I was met with a carefully orchestrated defense. Emily would deploy tactical tears, her voice trembling as she spoke of how stressed and overwhelmed she was. "I'm so sorry, Clara," she would whisper, dabbing at her dry eyes. "My mind is it's like a sieve. I'm just trying to hold it all together." How could I argue with that? How could I bring up a utility bill to someone who was supposedly on the verge of a nervous breakdown? Tom's strategy was different. He used a form of benevolent condescension, treating my concerns as silly, middle-class anxieties. "Clara, you've got to learn to relax, to go with the flow," he'd say with a placid smile, strumming a gentle chord on his guitar. "Don't get so hung up on the material stuff. It's just stuff, you know?" This from a man who was living off my material stuff, a man who hadn't contributed a single dollar to the household since his arrival. The job search was a recurring, farcical theme. Every week, I'd ask for an update. Emily would claim to have sent out dozens of applications for remote yoga instructor positions, but she never seemed to get any interviews. Tom had a new excuse every time. He was building his brand, networking with other artists, or on the cusp of a major collaboration that never materialized. He spoke of his music career with a delusional grandeur that was almost impressive. He wasn't just unemployed, he was a misunderstood genius, an artist too pure for the commercial world. My life began to shrink. I found myself staying late at the office, not because I had work to do, but because I dreaded going home. My house no longer felt like my own. I would retreat to my bedroom, the only space that was still truly mine, and listen to the sounds of them living in my house, their laughter as they watched movies on my Netflix account, their arguments over trivial things, the endless, maddening thrum of Tom's bass guitar. I was living in a state of quiet resentment, a constant, low-grade anger simmering just beneath the surface. I felt trapped, a prisoner of my own misguided kindness. The whispers began around the 5th month. It wasn't that the walls were thin, it was that they had grown so comfortable, so certain of their place in my home, that they had forgotten the need for discretion. They spoke about me as if I were not there, a background character in the story of their lives. The first time I heard it, I was in my home office, the door slightly ajar. They were in the kitchen, their voices carrying down the hallway. "Did you see the new car she's looking at?" Emily's voice was sharp, edged with envy. "Another new toy. Must be nice to have all that money and nothing to spend it on." "She spends it on us, this babe," Tom said with a chuckle. "Don't forget that. We're her favorite charity." They both laughed, a sound that felt like a physical blow. I froze, my fingers hovering over my keyboard. Charity. Is that what I was to them? Not a sister, not family, but a resource to be exploited? "I just wish she'd be more generous with it," Emily continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She could easily give us some money to start our own yoga and music retreat. She has no idea how to live. All she does is work and hoard her money. It's actually sad, when you think about it." "She's a classic workaholic," Tom agreed, his voice dripping with faux pity. "No passion, no soul. She's got this big, empty house and this big, empty life. In a way, we're doing her a favor. We're bringing life into this place." I closed the door to my office, my heart pounding in my chest. My hands were shaking. It wasn't just the ingratitude that stung, it was the sheer audacity of their judgment. They were living in my house, for free, and they had the nerve to pity me? To call my life, the life I had built with my own 2 hands, empty? They saw my hard work as a character flaw, my financial prudence as hoarding. They had reframed my generosity as their due, a tax on my success. From that day on, I started listening. I became a ghost in my own home, moving quietly, paying attention to the conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. And what I heard was a steady stream of casual contempt. They complained about the food I bought. "It's always so healthy," Emily would sigh. "Doesn't she ever just eat a bag of chips?" They complained about my friends. Ben is so judgmental, Tom once said after Ben had come over for dinner. He just doesn't get the artist's struggle. But most of all, they talked about me. I was uptight, neurotic, obsessed with money. They called me a burden, a word so shockingly ironic that it almost made me laugh. One evening, I overheard a phone conversation Emily was having with our aunt. "Oh, it's fine living with Clara," she said, her voice oozing saccharine sweetness. "She's just a lot. You know how she is. Everything has to be perfect. It's a bit of a burden, having to walk on eggshells all the time. But we're making do. We're just so grateful for her help." A burden. I was a burden in my own home. The home I paid the mortgage on, the home I maintained, the home where they lived rent-free. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. They had constructed a narrative in which they were the victims, the free-spirited artists forced to endure the rigid hospitality of their wealthy, soulless sister. It was a masterpiece of self-delusion, a way to justify their parasitic existence without a shred of guilt. The anger that had been simmering inside me for months began to boil. It was no longer just about the mess or the noise or the expense. It was about the profound disrespect. They hadn't just taken over my house, they had rewritten our entire family dynamic to suit their narrative. I was no longer the generous sister, I was the difficult, wealthy relative they were forced to tolerate. I thought about confronting them, about playing the snippets of conversations I'd started discreetly recording on my phone. But what would that accomplish? More tears from Emily, more condescending platitudes from Tom. They would twist my words, deny everything, and somehow, by the end of it, I would be the one apologizing. They were masters of emotional manipulation, and I was an amateur in their league. No, a direct confrontation was not the answer. Logic had built my career in my home, logic would be the tool I used to reclaim it. My anger began to cool, hardening into something else, resolve. The whispers in the walls had given me the clarity I needed. This was not a family dispute anymore. This was a hostile takeover. And I was done being the gracious host. It was time to evict the squatters, and I was going to do it my way. The whispers had ended my denial, and now, they would fuel my plan. The turning point came not with a whisper, but with a crash. It was a Saturday afternoon, one of the rare weekends I didn't have to work. I had spent the morning in my garden, a small patch of tranquility I had cultivated behind the house. It was my one remaining space that felt truly mine, a place where their chaotic energy hadn't yet fully encroached. When I came back inside, my hands covered in dirt, I found them in the living room, surrounded by a group of their friends. At least 10 people were crammed into the space, lounging on my sofas, their shoes on my coffee table. The air was thick with the smell of incense and cheap beer. In the center of the room, Tom was holding court, his guitar in hand, playing one of his dreary, self-indulgent songs. This wasn't a casual visit, it was a full-blown party. A party they hadn't bothered to ask my permission for. I stood in the doorway, my presence going unnoticed for a full minute. I saw Emily, laughing, holding a bottle of my best wine, a special vintage I had been saving for a major career milestone. They were passing it around, drinking it straight from the bottle like it was a cheap screw top. "Clara. There you are." Emily finally spotted me, her smile wide and utterly devoid of shame. "We're having a little get-together. You don't mind, do you?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "This is our house too, and we'll do what we want." I didn't say anything. I was too stunned, too furious to form a coherent sentence. I just stared at the scene before me, the strangers in my house, the mess they were making, the casual, unthinking disrespect. I turned and walked to the kitchen to get a glass of water, my hands trembling. That's when I saw it. On the kitchen counter was a stack of mail. My mail, which I had brought in that morning and left in its usual spot. It had been opened. A letter from my bank, a statement from my investment portfolio, even a personal letter from a friend, all had been sliced open, their contents likely perused by my nosy, entitled guests. My privacy, the last bastion of my personal space, had been violated. But it was the crash that finally broke me. It came from the living room, a sickening sound of shattering glass, followed by a collective gasp and then nervous laughter. I rushed back in to see my favorite vase, a beautiful piece of hand-blown glass I had bought on a trip to Italy, lying in 1,000 pieces on the floor. One of Tom's friends, a lanky guy with a vacant expression, was staring at it, a half-empty beer bottle in his hand. "Whoa, sorry," he mumbled, not looking at me. "My bad." Tom just laughed it off. "It's all good, man. It's just a thing. Clara's not materialistic." He looked at me, a lazy grin on his face. "Right, Clara? Easy come, easy go." Something inside me snapped. The carefully constructed dam of my patience, which had been holding back months of frustration and resentment, finally burst. "Get out," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. The room fell silent. The music stopped. Everyone looked at me. "What?" Emily said, her smile faltering. I said, "Get out," I repeated, my voice louder this time, resonating with an authority I hadn't used in this house for months. "All of you. This party is over. Now." The friends, sensing the shift in atmosphere, began to shuffle awkwardly toward the door, grabbing their things and muttering apologies. They could see the storm in my eyes. My sister and her husband, however, just stared at me, their expressions a mixture of shock and indignation. After the last guest had scurried out, Emily turned on me, her face a mask of fury. "What is your problem? You completely embarrassed me in front of my friends." "Your friends?" I shot back, my voice shaking with rage. "You throw a party in my house, without my permission, you drink my expensive wine, your guest breaks something precious to me, and you think I'm the one with the problem? You go through my private mail, Emily." I pointed at the opened letters on the counter. For the first time, she had the decency to look slightly ashamed, but it was fleeting. "Oh, for God's sake, Clara, it was an accident. Mail gets mixed up. And it was just a vase. You can buy another one. You're so dramatic, you always have to make everything about you." It was a masterclass in deflection, a textbook example of her ability to twist reality. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. "This is not your house," I said, my words cold and precise. "You are guests here. And you have been the most ungrateful, disrespectful guests I could ever have imagined." Tom stepped forward, placing a calming hand on Emily's shoulder. He adopted his usual role of the serene, enlightened peacemaker. "Okay, let's all just take a breath," he said in a low, soothing voice. "Clara, you're clearly stressed out from work. We understand. You've been under a lot of pressure. Don't you dare patronize me," I snarled, turning my anger on him. "And don't you dare pretend this is about my stress. This is about you. Both of you. You have lived here for 6 months. 6 months. The deal was 3. You haven't paid a dime for rent, for utilities, for food. You've done nothing to find a new place to live. And all you've done is complain, disrespect my home, and treat me like your personal bank account. That's not fair," Emily cried. "We've been trying. The market is impossible. And you have so much, Clara. Why can't you just share it? Why do you have to be so selfish?" Selfish. The word hung in the air, so utterly absurd that it momentarily silenced me. I had given them everything they asked for and more, and in their minds, I was the selfish one. Because I wasn't willing to give them my entire life. "I'm done," I said, the fight suddenly draining out of me, replaced by a chilling certainty. "I want you out. Both of you. I want you out of my house." "You can't do that," Tom said, his calm demeanor finally cracking. "We're family. We have rights." "Rights?" I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. You have no rights here. You are not on the lease. There is no lease. You are month-to-month tenants who have paid nothing. And I am terminating your tenancy. You have 30 days. The color drained from Emily's face. 30 days? That's impossible. Where are we supposed to go? That, I said, turning my back on them and walking towards my bedroom, is no longer my problem. I closed my door, locked it, and leaned against it, my body trembling. I could hear their frantic, furious whispers from the other side. They were trapped, and they were furious. For months, they had seen me as a pushover, a soft-hearted sister who could be easily manipulated. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. That was a mistake they were about to regret. The ungrateful guests had finally worn out their welcome, and now, the eviction process was officially underway. But I knew it wouldn't be as simple as just asking them to leave. They had dug themselves in like ticks, and removing them would require more than just a verbal notice. It would require a plan. The 30 days that followed my ultimatum were a masterclass in passive aggression and psychological warfare. Emily and Tom didn't pack a single box. Instead, they doubled down on their victimhood, treating me with a chilling, theatrical politeness that was far more unnerving than their open hostility. They moved through the house like sorrowful ghosts, speaking only in hushed, martyred tones. Emily would sigh dramatically whenever I entered a room. Tom would play mournful, melancholic tunes on his guitar, the sound seeping under my door like a toxic fog. They were trying to guilt me into submission, to make me feel so monstrous for evicting my struggling family that I would eventually break down and rescind my notice. They were putting on a performance for an audience of one, and I refused to give them the reaction they craved. I ignored the sighs, the sad songs, the burnt toast they accidentally left filling the house with smoke. I communicated with them only through text messages, keeping my instructions brief and impersonal. The plumber is coming tomorrow at 10 a.m. Trash day is Tuesday. Please take the bins to the curb. But beneath their performance of wounded helplessness, I knew they were planning something. They were too quiet, too compliant. The open defiance was gone, replaced by a strategic retreat that set my teeth on edge. They were conferring in hushed tones behind closed doors, their conversations stopping the moment they heard my footsteps. They were plotting, and I was sure their plan involved finding a way to stay in my house, not finding a way to leave it. Feeling increasingly isolated and paranoid, I called the one person I knew would give me blunt, unfiltered advice, Ben. I met him at a coffee shop near my office, the neutral territory a welcome respite from the oppressive atmosphere of my home. As I laid out the entire saga, the broken promises, the whispers, the party, the fake politeness, his expression went from weary sympathy to sharp alarm. "Clara, you're in a more dangerous situation than you realize," he said, leaning forward and lowering his voice. "These aren't just ungrateful siblings. They're professional squatters, and you're their current mark." "The 'we have rights' line Tom threw at you? That wasn't just an empty threat." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "They can't have any actual rights. They've never paid rent." "That's where you're wrong," Ben explained, his financial advisor brain switching into high gear. "In this state, if someone has been living in your property for more than 30 days, even without a lease and without paying rent, they can be considered a tenant at will. You can't just change the locks or throw their stuff on the lawn. You have to go through a formal eviction process. A legal process. And people like them know how to exploit every single loophole in that system." A cold dread washed over me. I had assumed that my ownership of the house gave me all the power. Ben's words painted a very different, and much more complicated, picture. "They can drag this out for months," he continued. "They can claim you gave them a verbal agreement to stay longer. They can damage the property on their way out. They can even try to sue you for an illegal eviction if you make one wrong move. You told them to be out in 30 days, but did you give them a formal, written notice?" "No," I admitted, feeling a fresh wave of naive stupidity. "I just told them. Ben sighed, rubbing his temples. Okay, that's your first mistake. Everything from this point forward has to be done by the book. No more emotional confrontations. No more verbal agreements. This is a legal and financial transaction, and you need to treat it as such. You need to protect yourself and your asset. He took a napkin and a pen from the dispenser on the table. Here's what you need to do, right now. First, you need to serve them with a proper, written notice to quit. It's a legal document that formally terminates their tenancy and gives them a specific date to vacate the premises. 30 days is standard. You should send it via certified mail, so you have a record that they received it. And you should post a copy on their bedroom door. He scribbled down the name of a legal form website. You can download a template here. Fill it out today. Second, he went on, you need to stop all non-essential communication. Don't argue with them, don't justify your decision. If they try to engage, you say, we can discuss this after you have vacated the property. That's it. Be a broken record. Third, and this is the most important part, document everything. Every interaction. Every snide comment. Every rule they break. Take pictures of the condition of the house now, so you have proof of how it looks before they potentially trash it. Keep a log with dates and times. If this goes to court, your documentation will be your best weapon. He paused, his expression turning grim. And be prepared for them to fight back, Clara. They're not going to go quietly. They're going to paint you as the villain to anyone who will listen, family, friends. They will try to manipulate you. You have to be strong. You have to be clinical. Ben's warning was a splash of cold water in the face. I had been approaching this as a family drama, a painful but personal conflict. He had reframed it for me. This was a strategic battle, and I had been fighting it with all the wrong weapons. Emotion was a liability. My sense of familial guilt was a weakness they would happily exploit. I needed to be as cold and logical as the code I wrote every day. One more thing, Ben said, as I was gathering my things to leave. Change all your passwords. Bank accounts, email, social media. Everything. You saw them go through your mail. Don't assume your digital life is off limits. People who feel cornered and entitled do desperate things. I left the coffee shop with a clear head and a renewed sense of purpose. The fear and frustration were still there, but now they were channeled into a structured plan. Ben's advice had given me a roadmap out of the mess I had created. That evening, I went home and followed his instructions to the letter. I downloaded the notice to quit form, filled it out with their names, the property address, and a termination date exactly 30 days from then. I made 2 copies. One I placed in a certified mail envelope, which I would take to the post office the next morning. The other, I taped firmly to their bedroom door. I didn't knock. I didn't announce it. I just posted it and walked away, my heart hammering in my chest. A few minutes later, I heard their door creak open. There was a sharp intake of breath from Emily, followed by a string of furious, whispered curses from Tom. The performance of sorrow was officially over. The war had begun. That night, I moved a lockbox with my important documents, my passport, social security card, birth certificate, into the trunk of my car. I installed security cameras, small, discreet ones that covered the main living areas and the exterior of the house. I changed every single one of my passwords, creating complex, unguessable strings of characters. I documented the state of every room with time-stamped photos on my phone. Ben's warning had been a gift. He had armed me for the battle to come. As I lay in bed, listening to the furious, agitated murmurs from their room, I felt a strange sense of calm. I was no longer a victim in this story. The arrival of the formal notice to quit on their door shattered the fragile peace of our Cold War. The passive aggression evaporated, replaced by open, simmering hostility. The house became a minefield of tension. If I was in the kitchen, they would stay in their room. If they were in the living room, I would go straight to my office. We were two opposing armies occupying the same territory, each waiting for the other to make a move. Their move came a few days later, in the form of a coordinated attack on two fronts, emotional and legal. The emotional assault was led by Emily. She orchestrated a campaign to rally the family to her side. My phone started ringing with calls from aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. The story they had been told was a carefully crafted piece of fiction. In their version, I was a cold, heartless millionaire who was throwing my struggling, artistic sister and her husband out onto the street in the middle of winter, all because of a broken vase. "Clara, how could you?" My Aunt Carol's voice crackled with disapproval over the phone. "She's your sister. Family is supposed to help each other. Your mother would be so disappointed in you." Each call was a fresh wave of guilt and anger. I tried to explain my side, to detail the months of disrespect, the financial drain, the violation of my home. But their minds were already made up. Emily had gotten to them first, painting a picture of a damsel in distress and a wicked witch sister. I was fighting a narrative that was far more compelling than my boring, logical truth. After the fourth call, I stopped answering the phone when I didn't recognize the number. I was being isolated, cast as the villain in my own story. The legal assault was Tom's domain. About a week after I posted the notice, I received a letter in the mail. It was from a legal aid society, a pro bono law firm that helped low-income individuals with housing disputes. The letter was filled with dense legal jargon, but the message was clear. Tom and Emily were claiming they had a right to stay. They alleged that I had made a verbal contract, promising they could live in the house for at least a year. They claimed they had contributed to the household through maintenance and upkeep, a laughable assertion, and that my eviction notice was an illegal act of retaliation. My blood ran cold. This was exactly what Ben had warned me about. They were following the squatter's playbook to the letter. They weren't trying to win, they were trying to delay, to drag the process through the muck of the legal system, knowing it would cost me time, money, and emotional energy. They were banking on me giving up, on deciding that letting them stay was easier than fighting them. But they didn't know how much I had changed in the past few weeks. My anger had been forged into something hard and unyielding. This was no longer just about getting my house back. It was about principle. I would not be bullied, manipulated, or extorted. I immediately called Ben, who gave me the name of a real estate lawyer he trusted, a man named David Chen. I booked a consultation for the very next day. David was a sharp, no-nonsense man in his 50s with a reassuringly calm demeanor. I laid out the entire story, providing him with my log of events, the photos of the house, and the threatening letter from the Legal Aid Society. He listened patiently, nodding occasionally. "This is a classic tenant holding over case," he said when I had finished. "It's messy, and they're using a common but slimy tactic. The verbal contract claim is almost impossible for them to prove, but it's enough to gum up the works. Don't worry, though. The law is on your side. We just have to be meticulous." He outlined the plan. We would file a formal unlawful detainer lawsuit, the legal term for an eviction. It would force them to respond in court. The process would take time, likely another month or two, but it was the only surefire way to get them out legally. In the meantime, David advised, you have to be the perfect landlord. Do not give them any reason to claim you are harassing them. Don't turn off the utilities, don't change the locks, don't even get into an argument with them. Let them have all the rope they need to hang themselves. Just keep documenting everything. The most crucial part of his advice, however, was about my finances. They are living in your house for free, which is draining your resources. We need to turn that around. I want you to send them a formal letter, which I will draft, demanding rent for every day they have stayed past the notice to quit deadline. We'll set it at the fair market rate for a 2-bedroom rental in your area. They won't pay it, of course. But that's the point. When we go to court, we're not just evicting them, we're also suing them for back rent. Every day they stay, the debt they owe you grows larger. We are changing their calculus. Staying is no longer free. It was a brilliant strategy. It shifted the power dynamic completely. I was no longer just the victim, I was the plaintiff seeking damages. The longer they stayed, the more it would cost them in the end. That evening, I set the stage. Following David's instructions, I sent them the legally drafted letter via email and certified mail. It stated that as of the expiration of the 30-day notice, their tenancy was terminated, and their continued occupancy would incur a daily rent of $100, based on comparable properties in our zip code. The reaction was immediate and explosive. I was in my bedroom when I heard a furious pounding on my door. "Clara! Open this door! This is insane!" Tom's voice was filled with a rage I had never heard from him before. The calm, enlightened artist was gone, replaced by a cornered, panicked man. I did not open the door. I simply said, in the calmest voice I could muster, "Please direct all future communication to my lawyer, David Chen. His contact information is in the letter." "You can't be serious. $100 a day? That's extortion," he bellowed. "It's the fair market rate," I replied coolly. "You are welcome to leave at any time to avoid incurring further charges." There was a string of curses, the sound of a fist hitting the wall, and then stomping as he retreated. A few minutes later, the house was filled with the sounds of a furious argument between him and Emily. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. They were panicked. My logical, emotionless strategy was working. I had turned their greatest weapon, their ability to stay in my house, into a liability that was growing with each passing day. The stage was now set for the final confrontation. The legal paperwork had been filed. The financial trap had been laid. They had been emotionally and legally checkmated, and they knew it. Their time was running out. They could continue to stay, racking up a debt that would follow them for years, or they could finally cut their losses and leave. The choice was theirs, but for the first time in over 6 months, I held all the cards. I was no longer just defending my home, I was on the offense, and I was ready for the final act. The 2 weeks leading up to the court date were the most tense of my life. Living with Emily and Tom was like sharing a cage with 2 wounded, angry animals. The house was thick with their resentment. They made no effort to clean, and a layer of grime and neglect began to coat every surface. They would leave passive-aggressive notes for me in the kitchen. "Would be nice if someone bought more toilet paper. Guess we're not allowed to use the coffee maker anymore." I ignored them all, communicating only through my lawyer and continuing my meticulous documentation. My security cameras captured their escalating desperation. I watched recordings of Tom pacing back and forth in the living room, muttering to himself. I saw Emily on the phone for hours, presumably with our relatives, her voice a high-pitched whine of complaint. They were beginning to understand that their usual tactics, guilt, manipulation, and feigned helplessness, were useless against the cold, unyielding machinery of the law. The day before our scheduled court appearance, I came home from work to find them both waiting for me in the living room. It was the first time we had been in the same room by choice in weeks. They had boxes around them, some half-packed, some empty. The defiant posture was gone. They just looked defeated. "Clara," Emily said, her voice quiet and hoarse. "We need to talk." I remained standing by the door, my handbag still on my shoulder. "There's nothing to talk about, Emily. We'll see each other in court tomorrow." "Please," she said, and for the first time, I heard a note of genuine desperation, not the manufactured drama she usually employed. "Don't do this." "You're the ones who forced this," I replied, my voice even. "I asked you to leave. I gave you a month's notice. You responded with a lawyer. This is the path you chose." "We made a mistake," Tom said, speaking up. He couldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at the floor, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "We were scared. We panicked. This has all gone too far. Yes, it has, I agreed. We'll go, Emily said, her eyes welling up with real tears this time. We're packing now. We'll be out by tomorrow morning. We can't have an eviction on our record. We'll never be able to rent another place again. And we can't afford the back rent you're suing us for. It's thousands of dollars, Clara. It would ruin us. There it was. The final, desperate plea. They weren't apologizing for the disrespect, for the damage, for the months of emotional turmoil they had put me through. They were only concerned with the consequences to themselves. The eviction on their record. The debt that would follow them. Their self-interest was, as always, their only true motivation. I looked at them, at my sister with her tear-streaked face and my brother-in-law who looked like a shell of his former arrogant self. I felt a flicker of the old familial obligation, a pang of pity. But it was quickly extinguished by the memory of their whispers, their contempt, their utter lack of gratitude. Pity was a luxury I could no longer afford. But David, my lawyer, had prepared me for this moment. They'll probably try to cut a deal at the last minute, he had said. When they do, you need to decide what you want your victory to look like. Do you want to punish them, or do you just want them out of your life? I had my answer ready. I will make you a deal, I said, my voice as calm and steady as a surgeon's hand. It's the only deal you're going to get. You will sign a stipulated judgment. My lawyer has already drafted it. I pulled a document from my work bag and placed it on the coffee table. This document says that you agree to vacate the premises by 9 a.m. tomorrow. You agree to leave the property in a clean, undamaged condition. It also says that I am awarded a judgment against you for the full amount of the back rent you owe, which is currently $4,200. Their faces fell. We can't pay that, Tom muttered. I'm not finished, I said, cutting him off. The agreement states that I will not enforce the monetary judgment. I won't garnish your wages or come after your assets, on one condition, that you are out by 9 a.m. tomorrow, and that neither of you ever contacts me again. No phone calls, no emails, no showing up at my door. No talking about me to other family members. As of tomorrow, we are strangers. If you violate that agreement in any way, I will immediately enforce the judgment for the full amount, plus legal fees. I let the terms sink in. I was giving them an escape route, but it came at a price. They could walk away without the eviction on their record and without the immediate financial debt, but they would have to erase themselves from my life completely. The $4,200 judgment would hang over their heads like the sword of Damocles, a permanent insurance policy against any future contact or harassment. Emily looked horrified. We can never talk to you again? But, we're sisters. You stopped being my sister the moment you decided I was just a resource to be exploited, I said, the words coming out without a trace of emotion. You chose this. This is the consequence of your choices. They were silent for a long time. I could see the wheels turning in their heads. They looked at each other, a silent, desperate conversation passing between them. They had no other option. If they went to court, they would lose. The judge would grant the eviction, and they would still be on the hook for the money. My offer was the only clean getaway they had. Finally, Tom nodded slowly. Okay, he said, his voice barely a whisper. We'll sign it. I pushed a pen across the table. I watched as they signed their names on the document that would legally and figuratively sever our ties. There was no sense of triumph, no feeling of victory. Just a profound, hollow sadness. This was my family, and it had come to this, a legal contract negotiated in a battlefield that used to be my living room. They spent the rest of the night packing. The sounds from their room were no longer angry or sad, just methodical. The sounds of shuffling boxes, tearing tape, and quiet resignation. I stayed in my room, the signed agreement on my nightstand. The next morning, at 8:45 a.m., I watched from my window as they loaded the last of their things into the same beat-up moving van they had arrived in 7 months earlier. They didn't look at the house. They didn't look at my window. They just got into the van and drove away. At 9:01 a.m., I walked out of my room. The house was silent. Eerily, wonderfully silent. The confrontation was over. The occupation had ended. I was alone, finally, in my own home. The silence they left behind was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. For the first few hours after they drove away, I simply walked through my house, room by room, reclaiming the space as my own. The air felt lighter, clearer. I opened all the windows, letting a fresh breeze blow through, carrying away the last remnants of their presence, the faint smell of patchouli and stale resentment. The guest room, which had served as Tom's studio, was the worst. The walls were pockmarked with nail holes where he had hung his tapestries and shoddy soundproofing foam. The carpet was stained. Their bedroom was a mess of discarded trash and things they couldn't be bothered to pack. It took me the entire weekend, and the help of a professional cleaning crew, to erase the physical evidence of their stay. As I scrubbed and painted and purged, I felt a sense of catharsis. I wasn't just cleaning my house, I was cleaning my life. With every bag of trash I threw out, I was discarding the guilt, the anger, and the misplaced sense of obligation that had weighed me down for so long. I threw out the cheap incense burners, the cracked mugs they'd left in the sink, the ugly throw pillows they'd brought with them. I was meticulously and systematically reclaiming my sanctuary. The calls from family members continued for a week or so. I answered one last call, from the same aunt who had scolded me before. "I hear Emily and Tom moved out," she said, her tone accusatory. "Emily said you threw them out with nothing." "I gave them a place to live for 7 months, rent-free," I replied, my voice calm and firm. "I gave them a generous head start that they squandered. My conscience is clear. I will not be discussing this with you, or anyone else, ever again." I hung up before she could respond, and then I blocked her number. I blocked every family member who had called to judge me without hearing my side of the story. It was a painful, brutal process, like performing surgery on myself. But it was necessary. The entire episode had revealed the toxic, dysfunctional roots of my family tree, and I knew that my own health and happiness required me to prune some of those branches. My friendship with Ben grew stronger. He had been my rock through the entire ordeal, a voice of logic and reason when I was drowning in emotion. He came over the weekend after they left, bringing pizza and a bottle of good wine, to replace the one Emily and her friends had stolen. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. "And to written contracts." We sat in my clean, quiet living room, and for the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. I could breathe again. In the weeks that followed, I slowly rebuilt my life. I re-established my routines. I enjoyed my quiet mornings with a cup of coffee and a book. I worked on my personal coding projects in the evenings, undisturbed. I hosted a dinner party for my actual friends, the people who had supported me, and their laughter filled the house, chasing away the ghosts of the ungrateful guests. I never heard from Emily or Tom directly. The threat of the $4,200 judgment was a powerful deterrent. I did hear, through the grapevine of the few family members I still spoke to, that they had moved a few states away, supposedly staying on a friend's couch. Tom had a job, something menial in a warehouse, and Emily was trying to build up a small client base for her yoga classes. Their grand artistic dreams had collided with the harsh reality of needing to pay rent. I felt no satisfaction in their struggle, only a distant, detached sense of vindication. They were finally learning the lesson I had tried to teach them, that life requires responsibility, not just wishful thinking. The experience changed me. The old Clara, the one who would rush to solve everyone else's problems, the one who allowed familial guilt to override her own well-being, was gone. In her place was a woman who understood the importance of boundaries. A woman who had learned the hard way that you cannot help people who are not willing to help themselves. My generosity had not been a gift, it had been an enabler, allowing them to continue their irresponsible lifestyle without consequence. My house is once again my sanctuary, but it is different now. It is not just a structure of wood and nails, it is a symbol of my independence, my resilience. Every clean countertop, every quiet evening, every paid mortgage bill is a reminder of what I fought to protect. I am a software engineer. I solve problems. I had a bug in my life, a piece of faulty code that was causing the entire system to crash. I identified the bug, I wrote a patch, and I debugged my life. The process was painful and complicated, but the result is a system that runs cleaner, faster, and more efficiently than ever before. My life, like my code, is now elegant, logical, and finally, my own.